I found out I was officially erased from the city's systems 3 seconds before the alarms went off. That was my personal record. 3 seconds isn't much time. It's barely enough to swear, definitely not enough to panic. Panic is a luxury emotion. People who panic get caught. I just smiled, cracked my knuckles, and leaned closer to the wall of screens glowing in my apartment like a private constellation. Outside, the city didn't even blink. Neon ads pulsed against the rain-slick windows. Somewhere below, traffic hummed, delivery drones zipped past, someone laughed too loudly on the street. The megapolis was alive, breathing, unaware that its nervous system was currently splayed open on my desk. I took a sip of cold coffee and murmured, "Okay, sweetheart, let's make you forget someone." The file was already open. Name, birth data, employment history, social score, medical flags, Omega classification, helpfully highlighted in pale blue, like a bruise the system pretended was neutral. Blacklist entry 94,721st. The city didn't arrest people like this. It didn't knock on doors or read rights. It just corrected itself. Accounts vanished. IDs failed to authenticate. People slipped between cracks that had been carefully engineered to look accidental. I hated that part. The quiet efficiency. The way it felt smug. "Relax," I muttered to the system, fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm just here to clean up your mistakes." I worked best under pressure. Always had. There was something comforting about the tight focus, the way the world narrowed to code and logic and timing. No room for fear. No room for being an Omega in a city that loved its hierarchies neat and obvious. I bypassed the first firewall in under a minute. The second one tried to be clever, behavioral pattern checks, adaptive response loops. But it was still running. On assumptions written by overconfident alphas, who thought unpredictability was a flaw instead of a weapon. I grinned.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
Cute. A few keystrokes later, the blacklist entry flickered. Delete. Confirm. For half a second, everything was perfect. Then, the system shifted. Not locked. Not crashed. Adjusted. My fingers stilled. That was new. The background processes I'd mapped like muscle memory rearranged themselves. Threads rerouting with a precision that made my stomach drop. This wasn't automated defense. This was someone actively watching. Someone with clearance high enough to rewrite response logic in real time. "Oh," I whispered. "You brought a person." The first alarm icon bloomed red on the edge of my screen. I pulled up the live logs, scanning fast, adrenaline sliding into my veins like a familiar drug. And there it was. A digital signature embedded so deep, it might as well have been carved into the architecture. Valet. My spine went cold. Thomas Vale, head of cybersecurity for the entire city. The kind of alpha they put on recruitment posters and internal memos titled, "Why We Win." Former military analyst. 0 public scandals. A reputation for never missing a target once he decided it was his. I let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Well, that explains the personal touch. Another alarm. Louder. Closer. The blacklist entry resisted deletion now, clinging like it knew what waited on the other side. I could still force it, burn through layers, leave scars, but that would light me up across half the grid, and I didn't lose to alphas by being stubborn. I aborted the delete. Immediately, the system surged forward, trying to grab my signal. Digital hands clawed at my access point, tracing backward with frightening speed. "Easy, Tiger," I muttered, already moving. Backup route. Shadow node. Ghost tunnel. I dumped my connection through 3 decoys, and one very illegal relay parked somewhere. In a corporate server farm that absolutely did not know it was complicit. My screen stuttered, alarms blaring in angry red waves. For a split second, I imagined Thomas Vale on the other end. Calm, focused, eyes sharp as he watched my trail scatter. Did he feel it? The chase? My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. Light panic, neatly folded and shoved aside. I'd survived worse nights than this, as my apartment went dark. Screens powering down in a cascade of black. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the fire escape. The city air hit me, cold and wet, carrying the electric smell of rain and ozone. Below, sirens began to sing. I paused just long enough to look back at the silent windows of my own place. Somewhere in the city's core, my name was probably blinking red. Newly reclassified. Erased. Hunted. and personally interesting to the most dangerous alpha in the system. I smiled, despite the chill crawling up my spine. Sorry, Vale, I murmured, already descending into the night. You're not the only one who hates the blacklist. I watched Thomas Vale from 3 different angles, none of them flattering enough to make me feel better. The cybersecurity center looked exactly like power wanted to look. Glass walls, clean, lines, white light so bright it erased shadows before they had a chance to exist. Order made physical. Control made architectural. If the city had a spine, this place was the vertebrae that never bent. Vale stood at the center of it. Tall. Still. Hands loosely clasped behind his back as if he were inspecting a parade instead of responding to a live intrusion. His suit was dark, unremarkable, perfectly fitted. No unnecessary sharpness, no decorative authority. The kind of alpha who didn't need to advertise what he was. That alone irritated me. I zoomed in on his face through a ceiling camera. Calm. Focused. Eyes moving just slightly faster than the data scrolling in front of him. He wasn't chasing alarms. He was reading the system like a language he'd invented. Status, he said, voice even, not raised. A junior analyst straightened immediately. Target breached node 7, sir. Signal fragmented before we could isolate. Vale nodded once. Not disappointment. Not frustration. Assessment. Pattern? Adaptive. He anticipated the first countermeasure. Not it. Vale stepped closer to the main display. I could almost feel the gravity shift as people unconsciously made room for him. He didn't rush. Didn't snap orders like a bad stereotype of an alpha with something to prove. He simply knew. He aborted the deletion, Vale said, more statement than question. Yes, sir. Why? The analyst hesitated. Vale waited. Silence stretched, not threatening, just absolute. He realized I was watching, the analyst finally said. Vale's mouth curved, barely. Not a smile. Recognition. Correct. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. Great. He's pleased. Run a recursive trace, Vale continued. Not aggressive, quiet. I want to see how he thinks when he believes he's alone. I stiffened. That was smart. Too smart. Most security heads wanted brute force answers. Sweep. Isolate. Contain. Vale was interested in my mind, not just my access points. One of the senior staff glanced at another screen. Sir, this hacker has tripped multiple blacklist entries over the past year. Removed them cleanly. No data leaks. No financial gain. Vale's gaze sharpened. Motivation? Unknown. No, Vale corrected calmly. Not unknown. Unexamined. He turned slightly, and I caught a better angle of his profile. Strong jaw. Tired eyes that had learned how to rest without softening. This was not an alpha who enjoyed the hunt for its own sake. This was an alpha who believed in function. He's not random, Vale said. He's correcting something. My fingers curled against my palm before I realized it. One of the team leaders frowned. Sir, with respect, he's still a threat. He bypassed city-grade defenses. Yes, Vale agreed. Which means he shouldn't exist. There it was. The sentence landed heavier than I expected. Vale faced the room fully now. The system is designed to account for variance, for anomalies within acceptable parameters. When something operates outside those parameters consistently. He paused, letting the implication settle. It's an error. An error, I snorted quietly. Nice to know I've been promoted from criminal to glitch. Find him, Vale continued. Not to make an example, not to escalate force. His eyes flicked to a specific data stream. One I recognized, embarrassingly, as a trail I'd been proud of. Find him because a system that can be rewritten from the outside is already compromised. The room nodded as one. Discipline. Trust. I stared at the screen, heat crawling up my neck, irritation sharp and unwelcome. I didn't like how accurately he framed it. Didn't like that he wasn't wrong, or that part of me respected him for it. As Vale turned away, issuing quiet instructions, I caught myself leaning forward, studying the way he moved through the space, how people adjusted around him without resentment, how control followed him without coercion, dangerous, without ever raising his voice. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I murmured to the empty room around me. You're smarter than I hoped. That was the unpleasant part. The worse realization came right after. I was already planning my next move around him. If Thomas Vale wanted to understand how I thought, I was more than happy to give him a lesson. Just not the real one. I rebuilt myself in pieces. New access points bloomed across the city's digital underbelly. Abandoned servers, forgotten. Maintenance nodes, corporate test environments no one bothered to shut down properly. I wove them together into something that looked sloppy on purpose. Predictable. A little arrogant. A trap for someone who believed too much in patterns. I leaned back in my chair, boots hooked on the edge of my desk, and released the bait. A single data packet, deliberately malformed. Sloppy encryption. The kind of mistake amateurs made when they were in a hurry or scared. I sent it skimming along a route I knew the cybersecurity center monitored obsessively. "Come on, Vale," I murmured. "Let's see if you bite." He did. Not immediately. That was the first sign. Most security heads lunged at anything that smelled wrong. Vale let the packet pass, watched where it wanted to go, then followed. It sideways, cutting across my fake trail with surgical precision. I grinned. "Oh, you're good." The virtual space shifted as his countermeasures activated. Visualizations bloomed in my head as if the network were a physical place. Corridors of light, doors slamming shut, pathways rerouting in elegant arcs. Vale wasn't trying to corner me. He was mapping me. Fine. I fractured the trail, splitting myself into echoes. Half a dozen false routes fanned out, each carrying fragments of my signature. One dipped into a financial server. Another flirted with municipal infrastructure. A third led toward a medical archive that would have sent half the city into panic mode if breached. I watched Vale's response unfold in real time, fingers moving with quiet speed. He ignored the most dangerous-looking path. "Smart alpha," I muttered. "No impulse control issues?" He redirected resources toward the least dramatic route. The one that looked almost boring. The maintenance server. The digital equivalent of a back alley no one checked unless they already knew something was wrong. That was where I'd hidden the mirror. The moment his trace touched it, the reflection snapped shut around him. For a heartbeat, the system froze. Then Vale adjusted. I blinked. Instead of pushing harder, he rerouted, reversing the trace and feeding it back into itself. My mirror shuddered, warped, and then learned. I laughed out loud. "Are you kidding me?" He was adapting mid-chase, rewriting his own approach based on how I tried to trick him. Not brute force. Not protocol escalation. Conversation. The virtual space became a chessboard made of light and code. Every move I made, Vale countered. Not to win outright but to narrow possibilities. Every trap he laid I dismantled, not without leaving him something to study. We circled each other like predators who'd both realized the other wasn't prey. Sweat prickled at the back of my neck, adrenaline humming low and steady. This was the good part, the rare part, the moment when your opponent was smart enough to make you better. "Don't get cocky," I told myself, grinning. "You still like breathing." I shifted tactics, collapsing all the false routes at once and funneling my signal through a narrow, unstable tunnel. Risky. Fast. Elegant in the way that only terrible ideas ever were. Vale followed. Of course he did. At the last second, I vanished. Not fled. Disappeared. I cut power to the nodes entirely, leaving behind nothing but corrupted noise and a data signature that pointed convincingly to a dead end somewhere in the city's archival basement. Silence. I held my breath, counting seconds. 5. 10. Then, on one of my passive monitors, I saw it. Thomas Vale, standing alone in the cybersecurity center, staring at the screen where my trail had dissolved. The room buzzed around him, analysts talking, systems recalibrating. Vale didn't move. And then, just barely, his mouth curved. A real smile this time. It wasn't triumph. It was appreciation. I exhaled slowly, something warm and unfamiliar settling in my chest. "Well," I said softly to no one. An alpha with good taste in puzzles. I shut down my setup, heart still racing, and rubbed my face with both hands. I hadn't won. But I hadn't lost either. For the first time since the blacklist had learned my name, the hunt felt balanced. And that was new. Dangerous. And against all better judgment, kind of thrilling. I made my first real mistake at 2:14 a.m. It wasn't a technical error. Those I caught before they happened. It was human. Muscle memory choosing speed over patience, instinct over calculation. I trusted a route I'd used too often. A maintenance exit near the old metro lines that had saved my skin more times than I could count. Tonight, it betrayed me. The city stretched below like a living circuit board. rain turning streets into veins of reflected neon. I sprinted across the rooftop, breath sharp in my chest, boots skidding as a drone's searchlight sliced past my shoulder. "Damn it," I hissed, vaulting a low barrier. The alarms hadn't gone public yet, but I felt the pressure building, the subtle tightening of the city's grip when it decided you were done running. Drones buzzed overhead, quiet and persistent, their paths too precise to be random. Vale was here. Not physically, not yet. But his presence threaded through the response like a signature. This wasn't a dragnet. It was choreography. I dropped onto the fire escape and took it 3 steps at a time, landing hard on the street before ducking into the metro entrance. The station lights flickered, casting long shadows over tiled walls that smelled like damp concrete and old electricity. My pulse thundered in my ears. Too loud. I cut left, then right, blending with the night crowd spilling out of a late train. Heads down. Shoulders hunched. The city taught people not to look too closely. I pulled my hood lower and slowed my breathing. Almost clear. Then the drone descended through the stairwell entrance, hovering just high enough to see over the turnstiles. Its camera swept the crowd, pausing for half a second too long on me. I bolted. Shouts echoed behind me. Not panicked, not angry. Controlled. Coordinated. I tore through a service corridor, boots splashing through puddles, heart slamming hard enough to bruise. The exit burst open onto another rooftop. And there he was. Thomas Vale stood near the edge, city lights framing him like a deliberate backdrop. No weapon drawn. No visible backup. Just an alpha in a dark coat. Rain dampening his hair, eyes locked on me with unsettling calm. I skidded to a stop, chest heaving. For a split second, neither of us spoke. Up close, he was worse. Taller than I'd expected. Broader. Still not aggressive, but coiled, like restraint was an active choice, not a lack of intent. "So," I said, forcing a crooked smile, "you do exist outside conference rooms." "Alex," he replied. Hearing my name from his mouth sent a jolt straight through me. "You shouldn't be here." I shot back. "This is where bad decisions happen." His gaze flicked over me, sharp and assessing. And then, something shifted. His eyes darkened, focus narrowing, breath hitching almost imperceptibly. He smelled me. The realization hit at the same time his did. My scent, sharp with adrenaline and rain, spilled into the space between us. Omega. Unmistakable. My muscles tensed, bracing for it, for the invisible weight of alpha, dominance pressing down, for instinctive control snapping into place. It didn't come. Vale's jaw tightened. His shoulders squared, not forward but back, as if he were anchoring himself. Whatever he felt, he locked it down hard enough that I could almost hear the click. "Interesting. Run," he said quietly. I blinked. "What?" "You made a mistake," he continued, voice steady. "So did I. This ends one of 2 ways." His eyes met mine again, searching. "Tonight doesn't have to be one of them." Anger flared, sharp and defensive. "You don't get to decide that." "No," he agreed. "You do." For a heartbeat, we just stood there. Rain pattering against concrete, the city holding its breath. I saw something flicker across his face then. Not hunger. Not triumph. Doubt. I hated how much that mattered. "Tell your system," I said softly, stepping back, "that some errors are intentional." Then I turned and ran. I didn't look back until I was 3 rooftops away, lungs burning, legs shaking with leftover adrenaline. The drones hesitated, then peeled off, retreating like they'd been called away. Vale hadn't followed. I slowed to a stop under the shelter of a rusted overhang, rain dripping off my hair. My hands trembled now, the delayed reaction catching up. I pressed a palm to my chest, feeling my heart finally start to calm. He could have taken me. He hadn't. That scared me more than the chase ever had. Because somewhere behind me, Thomas Vale was standing in the rain, questioning a system he'd always trusted. And I had a feeling that doubt was going to change everything. I waited 12 hours before going back in, not because I needed the rest, though my body disagreed with that assessment, but because some doors should only be opened when you're calm enough to understand what you're seeing. Rage made mistakes loud. Fear made them permanent. By the time the city rolled into a gray, sleepless dawn, I was ready. I didn't touch the surface systems, not the flashy interfaces Vale and his people lived in. I went deeper, past the layers meant for oversight and compliance, into protocols that still smelled like their creators. Old code, rigid logic, assumptions written back when the city had first decided efficiency was a moral good. The real blacklist wasn't labeled. It never was. I slipped through a maintenance archive no one had accessed in years, riding a permissions ghost left behind by an obsolete security patch. The space unfolded around me like a buried chamber, dark, quiet, insulated from noise. And there it was. Not a list. A mechanism. My breath went shallow as I traced its structure. This wasn't about arrests or rehabilitation, or even control. This was about subtraction. Removing variables that introduced instability into the system's long-term projections. People weren't prosecuted. They were erased. Accounts nullified. Medical records flagged for systemic error. Employment histories scrubbed until no employer could verify their existence. Travel permissions revoked. Housing reassigned. Social presence downgraded to statistical noise. Death by bureaucracy. I clenched my jaw, heat rising behind my eyes. The categories scrolled past in clean, neutral font. Omega, high deviation risk, non-compliant, unpredictable, difficult to integrate into rigid hierarchies. Alpha, independent, exhibiting leadership outside sanctioned structures, potential influence vectors. Witness, individuals with verified exposure to internal corrective processes. I swallowed hard. This wasn't about crime, it was about control. My hands hovered over the keys as I followed one thread deeper, heart pounding louder with every line of data. I'd always known the blacklist was wrong. Cruel, lazy, efficient in the way only systems without conscience could be. But this was a purge with better branding. I scrolled faster now, anger sharpening my focus. Names blurred past, each one a life the city had decided wasn't worth the inconvenience of dealing with openly. Some I recognized. Ghosts I'd helped slip through the cracks, people who, deed vanished quietly after thanking me in messages I could never answer. Then I saw it. Vale? Thomas T. I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. I zoomed in, cross-referenced, traced the metadata with trembling precision. There was no mistake. Classification, Alpha. Independent. Status, monitored. Escalation threshold, pending. Pending. Not yet erased. Not yet corrected. Just waiting. Cold settled into my bones, deeper than fear. Vale wasn't the architect of this system. He was another variable it hadn't decided what to do with yet. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the implications crashed over me in waves. His calm. His precision. His refusal to use dominance when he'd had the chance. The system didn't care how good you were, only whether you fit. And Thomas Vale didn't fit as neatly as he thought. Anger flared, sharp and incandescent, cutting through the cold. Not just for myself. Not just for the people already lost to this machine. For him. For the Alpha standing in the rain, choosing restraint in a city that rewarded compliance. They'll come for you, I whispered to the empty room. Just like they came for us. I closed the file carefully, sealing the chamber behind me. This wasn't something I could smash and walk away from. Not alone. Not anymore. The blacklist wasn't a tool. It was a guillotine, with a waiting room. And now I understood the true scale of the war I'd been fighting blind. The hunt wasn't between me and Thomas Vale. It never had been. We were both already on the list. I didn't choose the location because it was safe. I chose it because it was honest. The abandoned server node sat beneath the city like a forgotten organ. Power. Still humming faintly through cables no one officially acknowledged anymore. Old infrastructure. Legacy systems. The kind of place the city pretended it had outgrown, even as it quietly relied on it to keep breathing. Perfect. I masked my signal just enough to be found by someone who knew where to look. Someone like Thomas Vale. The wait was tense, measured in soft blinks of status lights and the distant thrum of cooling fans. I stood with my back to a rusted rack, arms crossed, every instinct screaming at me that inviting an Alpha into my space, physically or digitally, was a bad idea. Then the connection stabilized. Vale's presence slid into the system like a controlled descent. No theatrics. No force. Just precision. You're reckless. His voice came through the speakers, calm as ever. I snorted. Nice to hear you too. A holographic interface flickered to life, resolving into his image, sharp, slightly tired. eyes already scanning the environment, as if he could see through walls made of data. You shouldn't have escaped, he continued. You shouldn't have hesitated, I shot back. Looks like we both have flaws. A beat. Then, surprisingly, a huff of something that might have been amusement. You contacted me. Congratulations, I said dryly. You noticed. Why? I pushed off the rack and stepped closer to the console, fingers flying. Because if you keep hunting me, you're going to get yourself erased. Silence. Vale's gaze sharpened. Explain. I didn't argue. Didn't posture. I pulled the files from deep storage and dropped them into the shared space between us, letting the data unfold piece by piece. Protocols, classifications, escalation thresholds. The real blacklist. You think you enforce the system, I said quietly. You don't. You're being evaluated by it. His jaw tightened as the information streamed past. I watched his eyes track the logic, the cross-references, the timestamps. He didn't react the way most people did. No outburst, no denial. He verified. I need source validation, he said. Already embedded, I replied. You'll find redundant confirmations in archived oversight logs, the kind no one reads anymore. He went still. Seconds stretched. The hum of the server room felt suddenly loud. Finally, he spoke. My name. Pending, I said. Which means, you're still useful to them. Vale leaned back slightly, folding his arms. For the first time since I'd seen him, the control in his posture looked deliberate, maintained. Why show me this? He asked. I met his gaze without flinching. Because you didn't take me when you could have. That was a tactical decision. Sure, I said. Keep telling yourself that. Another pause. Longer this time. You don't trust me, he said. No, I agreed easily, but I trust your instincts. And right now, they should be screaming. A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You're asking for an alliance? Temporary, I corrected. Conditional. You don't touch me, I don't disappear. We share information, we stop the list. And after? I shrugged. Then you can go back to chasing ghosts. Silence fell between us again. Heavy but not hostile. Finally, Vale inclined his head. Not submission. Acknowledgement. Temporary, he said. On my terms. Of course, I replied. Wouldn't expect anything less from an alpha who doesn't like being told what to do. His gaze lingered on me. Thoughtful. This doesn't make us allies. No, I agreed. It makes us a problem. The connection began to fade, but not before I caught the faintest shift in his expression. Not trust, but resolve. And for now, that was enough. The temporary safe house wasn't comfortable. Which was fine. Comfort made people careless. It was an old utility apartment tucked between infrastructure levels, no windows, concrete, walls, one flickering light panel that hummed like it was debating retirement. 2 chairs, 1 narrow table. Enough hardware to make it functional and just barely livable. Vale arrived exactly when he said he would. Punctual, I said without looking up from my screen. How very on brand. You invited me, he replied evenly. Temporary alliance, I corrected. Not a date. Disappointing, he said dryly. I snorted before I could stop myself, then froze. He noticed. Of course he did. We worked in parallel at first, words sparse, movements economical. Vale analyzed system responses while I peeled back layers, feeding him access where needed and revoking it just as quickly when instinct warned me not to give too much. Control without trust. It was efficient. Hours passed like that. Night shifts blurred into something softer, quieter. The city above us shifted into its low hum, the restless energy of a place that never fully slept. Your workaround is inelegant, Vale said at one point. I didn't look up. And yet, it works. It creates long-term instability. So does erasing people, I shot back. Funny how that never bothered the system. Silence followed, not awkward, just thoughtful. Eventually, he spoke again. You hide your Omega status deliberately. I stiffened. That's an observation, I said carefully. Not a question. I'm not interrogating you. Could have fooled me. Vale leaned back slightly, hands folded, posture open in a way that felt intentional. I'm trying to understand how you operate. I finally looked at him then. Really looked. Up close, without rain or pursuit or screens between us, he seemed human. Tired lines at the edges of his eyes. a faint crease between his brows that deepened when he concentrated. I operate like someone who learned early that being labeled makes you expendable, I said. He nodded once. The system treats omegas as volatility risks. I know, I replied. I've read the documentation, very flattering. That's not what I meant, he said quietly. I paused, fingers hovering over the keys. You don't fit their model, he continued. That makes you dangerous to them. Something warm and uncomfortable stirred in my chest. Careful, I muttered. That almost sounded like respect. Don't push it. We fell back into work, the rhythm smoother now. Less guarded. Occasionally our hands brushed when reaching for the same interface. Brief. Accidental contact that sent a strange awareness skittering up my arm. No dominance. No pressure. Choice. At some point, fatigue crept in, dulling the sharp edges of my sarcasm. I rubbed my eyes, stifling a yawn. Vale noticed immediately. You haven't slept. Sleep is a social construct, I said. Like fairness. Hilarious. You love it. He didn't deny it. A faint smile ghosted across his mouth, gone almost before it appeared. The sight did something reckless to my pulse. Why me? He asked suddenly. I frowned. What? Why help the people on the list? He clarified. You could have vanished. You have the skill. I exhaled slowly. Because once you know the list exists, pretending you don't makes you complicit. Vale studied me in silence, something unreadable passing through his eyes. I enforce order, he said at last. I always believed that was enough. And now? And now, he admitted, I'm not sure order and justice are the same thing. The air between us shifted, not charged, not heated, just aware. Two people standing at the edge of something neither of us had planned for. I broke the moment with a crooked smile. Congratulations. You're officially having a moral crisis. He huffed. Is it always like this with you? Worse, I said. You're seeing the toned-down version. We shared a look then, tired, sharp, quietly amused. No touching, no declarations. Just the recognition that something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but understanding. And for two people who'd spent their lives navigating systems designed to control them, choosing to stand in the same space without barriers felt dangerously intimate. I turned back to my screen, heart steady, instincts alert. Slow burn, I told myself. We had time. For once, no one was chasing. The trap wasn't elegant. It was desperate, layered, and ugly in the way only honest plans ever were. We set it across 3 levels of the city: digital, physical, and political. Because the system we were fighting lived in all of them at once. You couldn't cut out its heart without making it bleed everywhere. Once this starts, Vale said, standing beside me in the control hub we'd hijacked, there's no pulling back. Good, I replied. I hate edging. He shot me a look. That's not what that means. Pretty sure it is. Despite everything, he almost smiled. The first phase went live at 1:03. I injected the falsified audit trail into the oversight network, just believable enough to trigger internal scrutiny, just corrupt enough to force the system to reroute its own defenses. At the same time, Vale authorized a security sweep under his credentials, pushing pressure into the channels the blacklist used to hide. The system reacted immediately. Not like a machine. Like a cornered animal. Alerts cascaded through my screens in violent red waves. Permissions locked. Access keys revoked. Digital walls slammed down with a force that rattled the physical structure around us. Thomas Vale, an automated voice announced over the hub's speakers, sterile and calm. You are in violation of Oversight Protocol 7B. Stand down. Vale didn't flinch. Status? He asked. They're burning your authority, I said, fingers flying. Live demotion. They're framing it as internal sabotage. Expected. Then my own display flashed. Target reclassified, high threat entity. Action. Immediate neutralization. I sucked in a sharp breath. And there it is. Guess I made the list's final cut. The city shifted around us. Power grids flickered. Transit systems stalled. Somewhere far above, sirens began to wail. Not public warnings, but internal ones. The kind meant for people who knew exactly how bad things were. They're deploying drones, Vale said. Armed. I can hold them off, I replied. For a minute. Maybe 2. Not enough. Never is. I rerouted power. Overclocked my access. and opened myself up wider than I ever had before. Every instinct screamed at me to pull back, to vanish, to save myself. Instead, I anchored. Alex, Vale said sharply, if they isolate you, then you finish it, I cut in. You have the clearance, or what's left of it. I'm not sacrificing you. Funny, I shot back, heart hammering. I don't remember asking. The drones breached the outer level with surgical efficiency, metal bodies slicing through the air. I felt the system clamp down, tracing my signal with lethal focus. This was it. Vale moved then. He stepped into the command interface and overrode my controls, rerouting the system's attention onto himself. What are you doing? I demanded. Making a choice, he said, voice steady despite the alarms screaming around us. I won't let the system decide who gets erased. His credentials lit up across the network like a flare. The drones hesitated, then redirected. Toward him. Fear punched through my chest, raw and unwelcome. You'll die. So will you, he replied. Unless one of us draws the fire. I stared at him, realization crashing over me in a wave that stole my breath. This wasn't strategy. This was defiance. Damn you, I whispered. And then I moved. I pushed everything I had into the core, shattering the last containment layer. The blacklist's hidden architecture screamed as data spilled into the open, raw and undeniable. Vale stood his ground, absorbing the system's fury long enough for me to finish. When it was over, the drones fell inert, clattering uselessly to the floor. The alarms died mid-scream. Silence crashed down, heavy and disorienting. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then Vale exhaled, slow and controlled. Still alive? Barely, I said. Knees weak. A pause. Then, same. We looked at each other across the wreckage of a system that had tried to erase us both. Fear still lingered, coiled tight in my gut. But beneath it was something else. Resolve. He'd chosen me. Not because of instinct. Not because of dominance. Because he believed it was right. And that choice changed everything. You could feel it when the data went public. Not like an explosion, no fire, no screaming sirens, but like a pressure change. A collective intake of breath across the city's networks. The moment when something buried too long was dragged into the light, and couldn't pretend it belonged in the dark anymore. I hit publish with a single keystroke. No dramatic countdown, no speech, just truth. The blacklist unfolded across public channels in real time. Raw files, internal classifications, escalation protocols, names the city had tried to swallow quietly. Mirrors spun up automatically as watchdog groups, journalists and independent analysts grabbed the data and duplicated it faster than any centralized system could contain. The structure collapsed under its own weight. Oversight boards froze accounts. Emergency sessions were called. Official statements contradicted themselves within minutes. Polished language fracturing under the strain of undeniable evidence. People noticed. People remembered. The city for once didn't look away. I sat back in my chair, hands trembling now that the work was done. The adrenaline drained out of me in a slow, hollow wave, leaving behind an ache I hadn't earned the right to process yet. It's out, I said quietly. Vale stood beside the console, watching the cascade with an expression I couldn't read. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Relief, maybe. And something heavier. They won't be able to put it back, he said. Not without admitting what it was. That's the idea. My screen refreshed automatically, and I stiffened as my own profile loaded. No red flags. No silent restrictions. No warning banners. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my name existed in the system without an asterisk attached. Blacklist status. Null. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, shoulders sagging, as something tight and painful finally loosened in my chest. I'm not erased anymore, I said, the words sounding unreal. Vale glanced at me. You never were. Officially, I corrected, managing a weak smile. Hours passed in fragments, statements released, emergency shutdowns, systems restructured under public scrutiny. The city moved into damage control, but the damage wasn't ours. By dawn, Thomas Vale's resignation notice hit every major channel. Voluntary. Immediate. No spin. I stared at it longer than I should have. You didn't have to do that, I said softly. Yes, he replied. I did. He didn't look regretful. If anything, he looked lighter, unburdened by a role that had demanded obedience without honesty. I can't rebuild trust from the inside, he continued. Not after this. I nodded. So what now? That, he said, glancing toward the open city feed still flickering. Across the wall depends on what you plan to do with your freedom. The question hit harder than any alarm ever had. Freedom. I didn't have a clean answer. Not yet. The war was over, but the silence that followed it was disorienting. Without the constant chase, without the system breathing down my neck, I felt exposed. Empty. Like a room after the furniture's been hauled out, echoes lingering where something solid used to be. I said slowly. I'm going to sleep. For a week. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Ambitious. We stood there together, as the city recalibrated around us, neither of us quite sure how to exist without a target painted on our backs. The blacklist was gone. The damage remained. But for the first time, it felt like something new could grow in the space it left behind. And that was enough to keep me standing. The place had no screens. That was the first thing I noticed. And the reason I liked it. A quiet rooftop garden sat tucked between two repurposed buildings on the edge of the city's old industrial district. No neon. No drones. Just real plants stubbornly growing where concrete had cracked. Leaves brushing against the morning breeze like they hadn't gotten the memo that this city wasn't built for softness. Time had passed. Enough to let the noise fade into something manageable. I leaned against the railing, coffee warm in my hands, watching the city wake up without feeling the need to map its blind spots. Behind me, footsteps. You're early, Thomas said. You're late, I replied. I've been enjoying 5 whole minutes of not being hunted. He joined me at the railing, posture relaxed in a way I still wasn't fully used to seeing. No uniform. No badge. Just a dark jacket. And a man who'd stepped out of a system that no longer owned him. How's civilian life treating you? I asked. He considered it. I keep expecting alarms. Give it time, I said. The paranoia fades, slowly. Then it turns into sarcasm. I've noticed, he replied dryly. We stood in companionable silence for a moment. Not awkward. Not charged. Just shared. The city stretched out before us, flawed and loud and still standing. So, I said, glancing at him sideways. Partners. In an operational sense, he said. Sure, I agreed. Whatever helps you sleep at night. He huffed. You're impossible. And yet, I smiled. Here you are. We'd found our rhythm over the past weeks. Consulting, auditing broken systems. Dismantling quiet abuses before they had time to grow teeth. No official titles. No hierarchy. Just 2 people who knew how the city broke, and how to put pressure on the cracks until something better formed. A team. Not built on instinct. On choice. You know, I said thoughtfully. A few months ago you would have chased me off this roof. You would have jumped, he countered. Still might, I said. Keeps life interesting. His gaze lingered on me then, not assessing, not commanding. Just present. Alex, he said, voice low. I don't regret choosing you. The words landed softly. No weight. No demand. I met his eyes, something steady and warm settling in my chest. Good. Because I'm terrible at being someone's regret. A corner of his mouth lifted. I've noticed. The sun climbed higher. Light spilling over the city's edges, illuminating flaws without trying to hide them. For once I didn't feel the urge to disappear into the glow. I'd spent my life running, from systems, from labels, from the expectation that being an omega meant being managed, corrected, erased. I wasn't running anymore. I took a slow breath, feeling the solid presence beside me, the quiet certainty of standing with someone who saw me as an equal, not a variable. I used to run from the system, I said softly. Now I choose who I stand with. Thomas didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The city moved on below us, imperfect and alive, and for the first time so did we.